pretty much to answer your question, you can set up different protection groups based upon either one VM or a group of VMs, and then the same thing with the recovery plan. So it pretty much depends on what you're looking for, whether or not you want to test things or whether or not you want it, for future use. So like for instance, in a development environment that I have, we have set up a bunch of recovery plans and protection groups based upon one VM. So that we can go through and say, hey, look, you're a test VM. We want to really test whether or not SRM works and whether or not we think it's going to do what we want it to do. And so that's kind of what we go through with that. And we use one VM basically. Just because it's a little easier to do it that way than to say, hey, by the way, here's a group of 5 VMs. Let's try this. So hopefully that helps to answer your question.
Yeah. Probably like that.
What I'm going over is the vSphere replication portion of it. A lot of that is geared towards either people who don't have the same storage at each site, or perhaps they are an SMB and they don't, basically you're using hosted at one side and it's your own at the other site, so you don't have to be, EMC throughout, or you don't have to be EqualLogic throughout, or you don't have to be NetApp throughout. You can do whatever you want to. At the same time, you can do it, like I said, it replicates regardless of the underlying storage. It's based upon each VM itself, and it pretty much works to minimize the impact on the individual VM workloads itself. It is, again, it is on a per virtual machine basis. You can do it on a per VMDK basis. It goes back to pretty much simplifying everything, from my perspective at least. Some of the limitations that vSphere replication does have is that it is limited to the powered on VMs. So the second that you power off the VM, it goes into a paused replication state. So that is something to keep in mind for your VMs that are either going to be powered off or even suspended at different periods of time. vSphere replication also does not work on, say, RDMs. That's another thing to take into account. It also doesn't work on fault-tolerant VMs, and it doesn't work on the link-clone VMs, nor VM templates. So it does not work on a LUN standpoint, it works on the VM standpoint. It is also going to require a virtual machine hardware level of 7 or better, and it is also going to require an ESXi level of 5 or better. So keep yourself updated as far as using the vSphere replication part. Another couple things to keep in mind: it is not a synchronous transaction. It is async. So you can schedule a period of time for RPO from 15 minutes up to 24 hours. It's also not going to say if you create a VM to replicate every 24 hours. It's not going to say every 24 hours, boom, you replicate. Its goal is to make sure that everything is replicated to 24 hours to the point. So basically, if it thinks that you're going to be able to replicate, say, 2 gigs of data within 2 hours, it's going to start that replication at 22 hours to make sure that you still meet the RPO deadline. With this, you are going to, you're going to need an SRM server at each site. You're going to need a vSphere replication management server at each site. You're going to need a vSphere replication server at each site. You are also going to need a virtual center at each site. And you have to run, all of your versions have to match. So if you're at version 5 throughout. If one goes to update 1, got to update everything to update 1.
Are there any implications if you're running like any of the appliance versions of like vCenter?
I have not done anything with Virtual Center Appliance. So I'm going to go ahead and guess that it's not going to work because a lot of the plugins don't work with the appliance. So, I mean, from my standpoint, I would guess it doesn't work. That's nothing official. And then as far as what each of those things do, the vSphere Replication Management Server, you only need one per. It essentially maps the data stores in between each site. It's going to coordinate all of the interactions between the primary and replica sites. When you get down to the vSphere Replication Server itself, it is going to be managed by the management server. Basically what it does is it connects between the host on the primary site and the vSphere Replication Server on the replica site, because each of the hosts are going to have a service which runs within it that sends the data off to the replica site. It's going to write data to the ESX host via NFC. You can have multiple vSphere replication servers based upon the site, but for the most part, from what I read, best practice is one vSphere replication server per site. Once you get up to about 500 VMs that are being replicated, then you might want to think about adding a second one, but I mean, that's a pretty big site. The VRMS server and the VR server, they are both appliances, so everything is deployed as an OVM. So that's a pretty easy install. The services that run on the ESXi host itself, you have the VR filter, which it intercepts all the I/O between the VM and sends it over to the vSphere replication server on the replica site. You have the VR service that also runs on the ESXi host, and it manages the replication process. It also includes some of the VMODL APIs that lets you configure and reconfigure and even unconfigure your replication. And what it's going to do is it's not going to replicate everything that's in each individual VM folder. It's only going to replicate the VMX files, the VMXF files, the NVRAM files, and the VMDKs. This is the framework as far as how it all lays out in between, what you see through the UI and how all of the products are intermingling, combining each other. And it is rather complex. This is an example of the data store mappings that we have, and this is our, I work for IU, so this is one of our data store mappings from between our home site and between our replicated site that will be down in Bloomington. What you're seeing, I did a one-to-one mapping, and what you can do is you can also do a one-to-many mapping. So it's based upon trying to map in between the LUNs so that when you go through and you configure the replication on each VM, it tries to basically be smarter and fill in the blanks before you do. So that's what we're seeing here. Here is the screen as far as the synchronization of everything is. We have some extraordinary speeds because we have dark fiber laid that goes in between our data center that's here on the Indianapolis campus and between the one that's down in Bloomington. So, we have the ability to replicate, say, basically 4 gigs in about 9.5 minutes. So that's another thing that you need to take into. Basically, you need to think about when you start creating your RPO times and your RTO times. You want to make sure that you have the correct bandwidth in between both sites to make sure that you can fulfill the needs that you're supposed to. And because it is, it is replicated on the hypervisor level. On the top, you have what a data store looks like from the VM level, and then on the bottom, you have what it looks like at the replicated site. You're going to see a couple different VMDKs. You're going to notice the difference between the size and the actual provision size. So you're looking at the deltas basically. And here's a video. It's fairly easy to configure. So it's pretty short actually. If it'll play.